year's presidential lecture, and our goal, Dr. Eaton's goal in establishing this series was to invite nationally recognized speakers to this campus to discuss key issues in higher education. As all of you know, this year we have been fortunate in celebrating the 100th anniversary of the admission of George Washington Carver to Iowa State University. And the thing that I found so fascinating about this is how much we've all learned about George Washington Carver and about how much what George Washington Carver said turns out to be what we're saying about what Iowa State ought to be. That his special commitment to serving people is one that I think has always been a hallmark of this institution. That his commitment to finding new uses for old agricultural produce is something that we recognize is essential both for the good of the world, but particularly for the good of the Iowa economy. That his special priority on teaching science to the masses and opening doors to the underrepresented is something that we are trying to make a priority at Iowa State University, and that his special priority and emphasis on protecting the environment and doing thoughtful, sustainable agriculture, even while making it profitable agriculture, is something that Iowa State is becoming a leader in. In particular, he is a role model for the encouragement of groups to go into science who have historically not been there. And a priority for this university and this nation must be the encouragement of women and minorities to enter the fields of science. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Shirley Malcolm, knows full well the problems facing minorities and women entering the sciences. Through her work with the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, the AAAS, she has helped increase the number of minorities, women, and people with disabilities in science, engineering, and related fields. As head of the Directorate for Education and Human Resource Programs in the AAAS, Dr. Malcolm oversees educational programs and activities for underrepresented groups. But equally important, she helps promote public understanding of science and technology. Dr. Malcolm holds a PhD in ecology from Pennsylvania State University and an MA in zoology and animal behavior from UCLA. It is finally fitting that this particular year, our speaker today be a graduate of George Washington Carver High School in Birmingham, Alabama. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Malcolm.
When he said good morning, I was afraid I'd made a mistake. I thought it was dark outside. I am honored to have been invited to participate in this centennial celebration of George Washington Carver's enrollment at Iowa State University. I am proud to have been selected to give this presidential lecture as part of Iowa State's 18-month celebration, The Legacy of George Washington Carver, Celebrating Diversity. I feel many personal connections to Carver, which I want to share with you. You've already been told that I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I went through all of my pre-college education in Birmingham, and I graduated from George Washington Carver High School. My mother completed 2 years of a normal school program at Tuskegee Institute in the 1930s, coincident with Carver's tenure on that campus. I'll never forget when one of my daughters decided that she wanted to do a paper for Black History Month on George Washington Carver, and she had gotten the stuff out of the library and everything. And then she realized, I think I must have mentioned something about her grandmother going to Tuskegee. And she says, oh, really? Maybe I can call Grandma and find out whether she ever knew Dr. Carver. So, one Thursday night, the paper was due on Friday, one Thursday night, she got on the telephone to her grandmother and said, did you know Dr. Carver? She says, well, I didn't really know him. He had stopped teaching the students at my level by the time that I was there. She said, but we would always see him kind of doddering across the campus. You know, he just kind of, the thing that we remembered the most, she said, was that he kind of wore mismatched clothes. He really didn't care that much about the way that he looked. He was so much more wrapped up in his students and in his work. And the focus of his life was someplace else. And so she went on to talk to my daughter for a little bit longer. And the thing that I remember about that particular incident is that by doing that, I think that was the first time that I had ever talked to my mother or heard anything but my mother talked about George Washington Carver, even though I went to a high school that was named for him. It's amazing the kinds of things that we take for granted. Like George Washington Carver, I attended a largely white institution for college and graduate work, where I often experienced the situation of being the only. I too entered a program in the sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle. I was not the only in my institution, but I was the only in my department. That is, until another student, whom I found out years later, had decided to enter zoology after he saw that I was there and at least making it. And then there were two. Like George Washington Carver, my life was changed by the education I received in that institution. But there are the similarities in. I am not a legend. Carver's achievements stretch out before us like a rich tapestry, weaving complex relationships within black and white communities, achievements across many different fields, and self-sacrificing service to education of African Americans and to practical applications in agricultural science that few others can claim. While recognized within folk legend for his science, scholars view his most important contributions as a translator of science to people who were really at the grassroots. However we assess his scientific achievements, he made research accessible to common folk at a level appropriate to the resources they had available to them. When I was invited to give this presentation, I had to go out and buy a book on Dr. Carver. Because remember, I said that the things that were part of legend and that were part of the kind of the folk history was not really all that there was to know about the man. One of the people who got messed up in the canceled flight this morning was the dean from over at Simpson College, Jerry Israel. And we were talking about Carver. He happened, see, this book starts all kinds of conversations with people. And he was talking about the fact that they were having their own celebration this afternoon, which was the reason that he was so antsy about getting back here. And talking about the connections to Simpson College and the importance of Simpson College in Dr. Carver's life. Many of us are changed by our colleges and universities, but few of us really ever have the opportunity to change those institutions, or to even expect to change those institutions. Carver indelibly affected the landscape of Iowa State, if for no other reason that there is a Carver Hall in recognition of this distinguished alum. But there is a reputation to uphold. That's something else that he left. A legacy of tolerance, acceptance, diversity within the faculty, among the student body, and especially within the sciences. A reputation to uphold. That too is a part of the legacy. And if you think about the times, 1891, how amazing it is that Iowa State was accepting of this person when so many other places within this country he could not go. True, there are probably scores of schools named for Carver. I knew of at least 3 other high schools in my own state. But most of these buildings are legacies of a time when the races coexisted in separate spheres, living unequal lives. Dual educational systems were built to separate the races, and prominent Negroes were often selected for honor by naming schools for colored youth after them. This served a dual purpose. On the one hand, it tended to placate our communities and gave us appropriate, as it were, role models and heroes. And on the other hand, it signaled our race to would-be employers who might just be looking at paper applications. But Carver's name on a building at Iowa State represents a different kind of legacy. Rather than accommodation and separation, a legacy of inclusion. When Carver left the security of the faculty of Iowa State, he did not forget the lessons he learned here. He maintained contacts, we call them networks now. He borrowed ideas to use at Tuskegee and sent some of his best and brightest students back to Iowa State, to an institution which had nurtured him, where he felt secure that these students would be in like manner nurtured. This is the role of a good mentor. And what has happened to his legacy over time? Well, I don't know. That's a question that I hope Iowa State is asking and answering for itself during this centennial. The struggle to provide quality education for minorities has not abated, however. The efforts to achieve real diversity within the sciences and engineering has not yet been realized. The participation of minorities in higher education has increased, but the successful completion of education in the sciences by minorities has yet to be achieved. More and more predominantly white colleges and universities have signaled their acceptance of the challenge to provide quality education for minorities in the sciences and engineering. However, a disproportionate share of meeting this challenge for blacks is still achieved by historically black colleges and universities, which contribute disproportionately as the baccalaureate origins of blacks who go on to complete doctorates in the sciences. And we can't seem to jumpstart the system for some reason. In 1975, 261 PhDs were awarded to African Americans in science and engineering. 261 total for the entire country. In 1980, this number was 281. In 1985, 293. In 1989, 296. At this rate, it may take us a while to even provide one each for every school, no less department, that might need and require and want one of these faculty. The trends have been disturbing. Many of the gains have been seen within the social and behavioral sciences, which is good, but there hasn't been that much movement within the natural sciences and engineering. The other trend which is disturbing have been the great decreases in black males who have been receiving doctorates over this time. We can celebrate the increased number of women who are participating in these fields, but the base was so small to begin with that it's really nothing to write home to mother about. Within the natural sciences and engineering, to just look at that particular area, let's look at the numbers over that same period of time. Within the natural sciences and engineering, in 1975, this is all of the natural sciences and engineering, and it includes mathematics. In 1975, the number is 108. In 1980, 101. In 1985, 119. In 1989, 133. Now, if we get into specific fields, we realize how desperate the problem is. The numbers for math and computer science for those 4 target years are 10, 11, 5, and 7. I don't think we're moving in the right direction. In the physical sciences, the numbers for those target years are 31, 14, 25, and 28. It would actually be possible for me to invite all the people who receive natural science and engineering doctorates, probably to my house. And if they were willing to spill over into the yard, we could all have a party. That ought not to be so. But blacks don't have a corner on the underrepresentation market. If we look at Hispanics, American Indians, people with disabilities, women, we find problems for all of those groups in sharing this underparticipation compared with either population, workforce participation, or participation in higher education. Women made gains in the life sciences over this same 15-year period. In 1975, women were 21% of life sciences doctorates. In 1980, these are U.S. citizens. In 1980, they were 27%. In 85, 35%. In 1989, 42%. I have some hope that we have, in fact, reached critical mass, at least with regard to women's participation in the life sciences. And all kinds of other indicators seem to be pointing in that direction. Critical mass in terms of PhD production, but not yet critical mass in terms of their participation in positions of power and prestige on our faculties. And it's not really clear that we should be all too happy as what has been happening at those numbers, because those numbers were achieved through a combination of a decreasing participation by men as well as increasing participation by women among U.S. citizens. The decline has been among U.S. citizens, faster among male U.S. citizens than among female U.S. citizens. The numbers for women are not as good in some other areas, however. I have to warn you, I gave you the good news first. If we look at chemistry over time, those same target years, in 1975, I found this hard to believe. Women received only 7% of doctors in chemistry. In 1980, this was 12%. In 1985, 17%. And in 1989, 21%. Many people would probably be surprised to realize that the figures in mathematics and computer science are actually higher than those in chemistry. Proportion. Women were 10% of doctorates in mathematics and computer science in 1975. This rose to 17%, then to 14%, then to 17%, and in 1989, women received 23% of doctorates in mathematics and computer science. Now, I must warn you, don't think that this indicates any great trend, because the movement within this period of time will, let's call it, turbulent. There were ups and downs. And the other part that I think that we must realize is that during that time, among U.S. citizens, the numbers of doctorates in mathematics and computer science, especially in mathematics, fell by a dramatic amount. And women achieved a good amount of their proportional rise by just not decreasing as fast as the men did. In engineering, the gains have been dramatic. In 1975, women received 2% of engineering doctorates. By 1989, this figure was 13%. Now, by contrast, however, let me just give you the numbers rather than the percentages for blacks during that same period of time. The target years, again, are 77, 80, 85, and 89. 11, 11, 19, and 23. 23 for the entire country. There's a program called GEM. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, Graduate Engineering Degrees for Minorities. GEM contributed disproportionately to that 23, as they did to that 19 as well. GEM is a fairly small program compared with all of these other institutional inputs that are going on, but it actually did more than its fair share. Now, one of the things, though, that GEM, I think, really kind of reassures me, because you can look at these numbers and really get depressed, but I'm not depressed. I'm hopeful, because GEM has a message for us, and the message, if anything, is intervention is possible, and that it works. You can affect the choices by providing people with accurate information at a time when they need it in order to make certain critical decisions, by providing support, psychological as well as financial, and by providing mentoring structures. People who want to help students learn, achieve, and get out on time. Changing the situation for women has meant addressing the larger societal issues that affect women's participation in non-traditional fields overall, attitudes about the place of women within the society, the family, the home, the structure, etc., as well as affecting local institutional practices. Now, if we want to affect these numbers, what do? Several years ago, when Walter Massey, who is now the director of the National Science Foundation, when he gave his presidential address before the AAAS, he said, I want to challenge those departments out there to double +1 their enrollments of minority students. And he said that he had to say the +1 because for so many, the number was 0. How do we get the graduation rates? How do we get the graduation figures? I think that it is a matter of each institution taking a personal responsibility for affecting not necessarily the national problem, but their part of it, their department, their students, their climate, their environment, the monies that they control, the fellowships the research assistantships under their particular area of control. One of the things that we realize is that a lot of people say that they're going to major in the sciences and engineering when they come in as freshmen, and by graduation they're gone. If we affect the rates of retention, we can immediately relieve the problems. Even as the numbers of students can be retained who go into the sciences and engineering, there's still a problem with recruitment. Many students still don't know what it means to be a scientist or to be an engineer. And some of this has to be addressed. They need to know what it takes to get there and what kind of life it allows you to have. Then there's the question, ultimately, of readiness. For many students, even if they wanted to go into science or engineering, they're not ready because they have not had the pre-college preparation that will enable them to even make the choice. Sometimes they may even have taken math every year, but no one told them that it wasn't enough to just take math, but you had to take a particular kind of math. That one kind of math got you to engineering, and another kind of math probably didn't get you much of anywhere. I call that junk math. And you've seen it in curriculum listings for high schools. Business math, consumer math, pre-algebra. That's to get you ready to take the course, it'll get you ready to take algebra. If we actually stop and look, we realize that by the time we get the students, an awful lot of damage has often been done to an awful large number of them. That argues, however, for not necessarily instituting still more practices of selectivity and weeding, but in fact for connecting to the pre-college talent pool before the damage has become irreparable. It means affecting the quality of the preparation and the experiences of the students. And maybe ultimately it means affecting the way that their teachers are educated. Recruitment means providing them experiences. I think sometimes that we have to really look and see how the athletic department does it. They know what they're doing. They have taken recruitment to a high art. They have people all over the place, probably all over the state, if not all over the region, looking for a good player. Raw talent, they call it. Somebody down at Pee Wee. You know, somebody in the local CYO league or whatever it is. And somebody sends somebody the word back, this student looks good, keep your eye on. And somebody keeps their eye on that student. There's a whole set of leagues that you can get into, and you can learn, and you can be nurtured, and you can be mentored, and you can be enabled. Now, do we have a comparable kind of thing within science and engineering? Not so you could tell. Not that extensive. Not so that we can identify students and provide them the things that they need early on. I think that this may be a case where we need to kind of watch and see what the coaches are doing and how they can find students and identify them and bring them in and bring them along. Retention. I know that you have been looking at some retention models, that you have been looking at some of the work, some promising work that has been done by Yuri Treisman at Berkeley, maybe by some of the people in calculus, maybe by some of the people at MIT in physics, to see what does it take to really enable students to make it in the system. One of the things that I think that is very interesting about the research is the research suggests that students need feedback from faculty, that we have to tell them how good they really are doing. And if they're really good enough to go on, we have to say that to them. I stood in front of a group of students and said, have any of you thought about graduate school? And some tentative hands went up. And then I say, in contrast, how many of you thought about law school? Many more hands went up. How many of you thought about medical school? Many more hands went up. And then I realized that what we had there was the fact that there's a much better marketing system for these other things. Business, law, medicine. Of course, they're helped out in that by the media. You can see doctors and lawyers and what have you on television fairly regularly. We have no ongoing series about a scientist hero or heroine. Many of the interventions that we put in place focus on fixing the student instead of the system. That somehow it's the student that's broken rather than the kinds of mechanisms by which we provide the education to the students. One of the things that I always had to remember when I was teaching, and I forgot regularly, I'm going to tell you, I was guilty. Not everyone is a major. Not everyone needs to know this. There is no such thing as you'll understand when you get to the next course. Sometimes we'll only get one shot at a student. I happened to be in a meeting yesterday where the governors from the NGA who comprised the panel that dealing with looking at the monitoring issues were actually in discussions with the resource panel, and they had a public meeting. And your governor made the statement when we were discussing Goal 4 that in fact he had to take all the math and science as though he were going to be a major in high school. And he made a statement like his mother had wanted him to be an engineer. And then he said, and I guess taking all that stuff didn't hurt me any. Now, I think it is very interesting that we never know who our leaders will be. And we never know what kinds of attitudes they will take about our subjects into their work. Now, if he had thought that it hurt him a lot, we may be in deep trouble in this state regarding science and engineering. I don't know that you may not be in deep trouble anyway, but I'm just saying that there are people who affect very much what happens within the community who are not necessarily of that community. And I think we have to be concerned about the people who are not the scientists and engineers and what attitudes and values about science and engineering they will take from our institution. It was very interesting as I was reading this book. I happened to come across a section that I must share these few paragraphs with you because I think that it said something about Carver's teaching philosophy that is important for us to remind ourselves. After the Civil War, many Southern blacks were eager to taste the forbidden fruit of education and made significant sacrifices to educate themselves and their children. The reference there to forbidden fruit was because it was against the law to teach slaves to read and write. So that's the forbidden fruit. Many of the more gifted and fortunate could and did benefit from higher education, but many were so enmeshed in poverty and ignorance that they had to be taught basic survival skills first. The teaching methods used at Iowa State were hardly appropriate for this task. And it is a measure of Carver's greatness as a teacher that he was able to be as effective under the conditions at Tuskegee as he had been at Iowa State. And at the heart of Carver's success was his enthusiasm for his subject and his unusual perspective on it. Whether his course was labeled botany, chemistry, or agriculture, what he taught was an appreciation of the miracles and beauties of nature. And it goes on for a while, and it says, in Carver's philosophy, nature was a great teacher. An understanding and appreciation of natural phenomena and forces led to a clearer perception of all great truths. Nothing existed in a vacuum. Everything was an integral part of the great whole. Therefore, when a student really understood one phenomenon, he could easily be led to understand all related phenomena. Learning, Carver stressed, should be structured to lead a student from what he already knew to the nearest related unknown. Education was merely the process of understanding relationships. And he goes on, and the writer goes on to say, Carver believed the best means of teaching relationships was the group method. What goes around comes around. Students were not taught abstract, isolated precepts of the various sciences. Instead, one particular object, like the cowpea, was studied in depth, and the student was shown how the various natural forces that were usually studied separately under such headings as chemistry, meteorology, botany, and entomology came together in the production of this single plant. When a student thoroughly understood the processes that created a cowpea, he could really grasp how these forces affected other phenomena. Even his approach to teaching displayed Carver's self-ordained role of generalist in an age of specialization. And what he was basically trying to do was to meet the needs of the students that he found there at Tuskegee, so says the author. Well, I contend that the author may be a little off base, and that in fact it's not only the students at Tuskegee, but also the students at Iowa State, and in most of our institutions, who need the kinds of things that Carver was trying to provide. In that case, not only an enthusiasm of the subject, a connection to the level that the student brought to the classroom, that a perception of the teacher as guide rather than dispenser of knowledge, a realization that the most important thing is to inspire students to learn on their own, and the creative use of cooperation and competition. One of the things that he stressed was the need for context, that you must embed it in the reality that the student brings. Now, even as we say all of these things, we have some particular challenges within the sciences in terms of bringing this thing which we know to be true into reality. One of the big problems And that they deal with problems of practice as well as problems of attitude. One of the problems is our attitude about science. That it is difficult, that it is hard. Well, it may be difficult, but it shouldn't be inaccessible. Another problem is our beliefs about intelligence. We really do think that it is ability, that you either have it or you don't. We really believe this, and it is shown in almost every educational practice that you can find, whether it be tracking or grouping at the lower grades or weeding out of your freshman chemistry course. Only the fit survive. Social Darwinism carried to an extreme. A lot of the issues are tied up in our belief about race. The National Opinion Research Center poll says that we really do believe, in our heart of hearts, we're really honest, that different groups of people are differentially intelligent. The same way that the persistent myth of the math gene for girls. We have beliefs about winning and losing, about the fact that we can't win unless somebody else loses. We have beliefs about selecting and enabling. As difficult as all of those attitude and belief systems are to deal with, when I was a kid in Birmingham, they said, forget about how they feel about you, forget about the attitude, it's the behavior we want to affect. Attitude will follow changes in behavior. And I believe that. I really believe that. And we've been able to get people to behave differently because the problem that we face, that of increasing the diversity within science and engineering, has been placed in a larger national context. The larger national context is times have changed. Those people that we used to get into science and engineering are no longer just showing up. More and more of the students that will be available to you are more and more of the students who have traditionally not made a choice for science and engineering. And with changes in demographics, we must change our behavior. And we cannot affect weeding strategies. We have to cultivate, use an agricultural motif, we have to cultivate the next generation of students. There is concern about the shortfall. I don't like to really deal too much in discussions about shortfall because there are always ways of dealing with shortfalls without dealing with the central issue. You can just import your talent and leave the core of the problem unchanged. There is concern about the decreasing American presence and about issues of technology transfer when our students basically go home and start to compete with us in an atmosphere where they have a much larger resource base in terms of capital and different attitudes about business and industry and trade. But I guess that at the bottom line, I want more diversity within science because I think that we need more diversity within science. Science is shaped by the doers of science. Diversity among the doers begets diversity among the approaches, the issues that get brought to the table. At the base of it, science is something, as a human endeavor, that empowers. Carver understood this, which is the reason that he tried to take poor, itinerant, ignorant, in the book learning sense of the word, students, and move them to someplace else, because he understood that even though they were not slaves, they were not yet free. It's good to have celebrations. And it's especially good to have celebrations of diversity. You are fortunate at Iowa State to have an alum whose life is a testimony to the fact that you can be excellent and you can work to achieve equity, and that these things are not incompatible. Thank you. George Washington Carver, Scientist and Symbol, by Linda O. McMurray.